Madeline Sklar asked, how our network graphs work? How do these things work for identifying influencers and making use of them? So I thought I'd go through the process of assembling a network graph from scratch. There will be parts that are proprietary code that I'm not able to share, but I can share this from the data sources and how the open source software works, and I'll leave it as the textbooks say. I'll leave it as an exercise to the reader to engineer your own middleware code. So first thing, you need a data source of some kind. In this case, I'm going to use Brand24, which is a great media monitoring company based in Poland. And I'm going to use South by Southwest as the data source. You can see here there's the number of mentions that are coming out of South by Southwest and stuff. And of course, as we get closer to the event, it peaks. Interesting tip here, by the way, if you look at Instagram and Twitter, they are about on par in terms of the amount of information being shared. So I'm going to select both of them and going to requisition a data export for this. This could take a while, so I'm just going to take a quick pause here. As you can see, we get an Excel file out of the export. Fire up Microsoft Excel and just take the raw data out through CSV. This would be the time if you wanted to do any kind of computations on it, such as totaling up engagements, etc. For the purposes of doing influence mapping, you don't really need to do that, but feel free to do so if that's something that is important to you. Now we need to do the data preparation part, and again, this is a part where there's a little proprietary software involved, so this may not be as useful. But what it's going to do is take this file and split it into a bunch of pieces. Anytime you're doing influence mapping, we need to identify who the entities are, which in these cases are, like here, listed as titles. This is the individual handles. And then you need to map the titles to who they're talking about. So in this case, we see this person here is talking about these handles here, and it's those relationships. So this one node here has 1, 2, 3 relationships. It is talking about 3 people. So and actually, that looks like there's a bit of a bot farm there, but we'll tackle that separately. So you have one node here talking about another node here, and it's this set of relationships that help us build network graphs, because when we're talking about influence, it is less important to talk about how loud a node is than who is being most talked about. So the software is going to go through and extract all that. So let's go ahead now and fire up our mapping software itself. This is a package called Gephi. And oh yeah, we also need to do a bit of tuning. So we're going to open up our node and edge files and just make sure that they are properly cleaned and tuned for mapping here. Let's go ahead and get that one and our node file. And we're going to change that to ID because that's the way Gephi seems to like to do things. This file looks good. All right, let's go into Gephi now. Start ourselves a new project. We'll import our node report. Make sure everything looks good there. And this is the information about the different nodes talking about South by Southwest. We're going to import the edge file. Make sure it's the right one. Nope, that's the correct one. And so now we've created the relationships between these things, and what we should see is a massive, almost unreadable block. This is every possible relationship. So first thing we want to do is we want to eliminate nodes that frankly have few relationships. Generally speaking, for an influence map, I like to have about sort of the top 1,000 nodes. Your mileage may vary. You may choose to have less or more. In this case, we have 24,000 to start, so we can safely prune out a good chunk of this. You can see here on the number of degrees of connection. It's like degrees of Kevin Bacon. I'm going to trim out everything below 4th degree. And remap it. perform a few extra calculations. Modularity is an important one because modularity determines how closely knitted together different nodes are. In this case, South by Southwest, there's 315 different groupings here. And we're going to compute the closeness. Now, this is where the magic happens. Eigenvector centrality is a form of measuring betweenness, or how close nodes are to each other. If we don't know that, then you just have, again, a list of who is loud and such. By using a centrality measure of some kind, we have the ability to determine who is talked about the most, who is referenced the most. Now, before we plot this, we're going to go ahead and just turn on some coloring here. Let's make a nice colorful palette. Let's go with 16 different colors. This is going to use the modularity, which is how tightly knit different groups are. You can see there's a variety of lovely pastel colors here just in time for the spring holidays. You'll also see the group numbers, the group IDs. So 12% of the population is in group 77, 10% is in group 280. And when we're talking about mapping with influencers and understanding influencers, the most influential people are going to be the ones who have large communities around them. The second thing we're going to want to do is make the ranking, make the bubbles different sizes, and we do this by using eigenvector centrality. Again, this is the measure of how much a node is talked about the most. So we see the chart has changed substantially now. We've got some of these really big nodes. These are the things that are most talked about, and it looks like I'm guessing South by Southwest music is happening because some of these look like bands. The next thing we want to do is we want to rearrange this, cluster this, so that it's not just one giant hash. And there's a number of different algorithms you can use. I like, for larger graphs, I personally like OpenORD because it's really, really fast. But you can use any of these visualizations to determine how you want the chart to be laid out. Some, like Fruchterman and Rheingold, make sort of a very neat, densely packed web. Some of them, like Force Atlas, create different clusters. I like Force Atlas for smaller graphs and OpenORD for bigger graphs, mostly because I don't want my computer to melt. And what we see here is the graph is beginning to take shape. And now here's a whole bunch of musicians here, and then we have different communities around those musicians. Let's go ahead and switch to Force Atlas just so we can get a sense of what that looks like. And the graph will change. This will take a little while, so I'm going to just put this on pause. So Force Atlas has finished cooling down here, and again we see, yep, these are all musicians and bands and things like that. That tells us a lot about what's happening at South by Southwest right now. Let's go ahead and move the graph around a bit. We have a super tight group. I don't know what these people are, but we can certainly take a look at them and figure out what they are. And I can do that by highlighting them in the data laboratory to find out who their handle is. Their Instagram handle, something we could go ahead and look at. Let's zoom back out. If we make a nicer rendered version of this, let's do a little bit of tuning and cleaning here, rescale it. This is a printer-friendly version that we can use to zoom in or zoom out. So let's reset the zoom, turn it to a PDF. And then if we want, we can dig into the details of the PDF very, very closely. And sort of zip around to see the different colored communities. Each color represents sort of a group of people that have an affinity. So here's an example of one affinity. And this is actually a really good example of network mapping because South by Southwest has so many distinct communities that each of these bands sort of has their groups of fans and advocates. So if this was these are all companies. Notice how the companies are all kind of stranded on their own little island, away from the party. There's a metaphor for marketing. But if we wanted to figure out sort of who to talk to, at an event like this, or who the things to the groups we want to reach. The Hip Hop Weekly magazine would be one. DJ Alamo, Get Repost is probably one we should eliminate because it's just a reposting service on Instagram. So we need to trim that out and then rebuild the map. But you get a sense of who the different folks are now. One of the most important things to do is obviously you have the individual communities. If you know you want to reach a certain community, you would know who to plug into, but you also want to look at connectors. So you want to look at connectors between communities, and these are sort of the large bubbles and the bubbles that sit in between different communities. So there's a whole bunch, like this ATX concert one here, really is connected to a whole bunch of these different music band. So if we want to reach this specific community, this would be one of the nodes. This do 512 node here would be an example of a super node that we'd want to try and recruit. So we identify our influencers not only by the amount that they are talked about, Gmail not very helpful there, but also how they're connected to the different groups of people. I don't know who Spinrilla is. I feel so old right now. But that's how you interpret an influence map and understand the importance of each bubble. Now, in a more sophisticated version, if we weren't just trying to put this together very quickly for a demo, we blend in a SQL database that pulls in the bios for all of these nodes. So we would have understanding within this map of who each of these people are and sort of what the importance is. And if we wanted to kick it up a notch, we can also export this. So let's take this as Southwest influencers. And then now load this into Excel. And there's our centrality measure. I personally like to give it a percent just because it's easier for people to interpret. It's not, I'll call it something like a relevance to the conversation, but that's really just a convenience measure more than anything else. And we'll clean up some of the intermediary work that we're doing. So we see all of these people are in one group, Module 26. So I'm guessing, based on the names, these are all some of the headline musical acts. We also see that for the headline groups, look how many of these are first and foremost Instagram accounts. This is stuff that this tells us for South by Southwest right now, in terms of the festival and the music that's going on. Instagram is where we need to focus our efforts, not Twitter. In fact, it is some time before you get down to Twitter accounts that have any kind of relevance to the conversation. So that's what we do, how we do it, how we build it within these open source tools. Gephi is an open source tool. It is free of financial cost. As you can see, being open source, it doesn't have the world's nicest interface, but it does the job. Brand24 is it's an online service. It's a SaaS-based service. It is very affordable, so go ahead and check them out as well for your data source. And then you're going to need some middleware to glue stuff together. The other thing that you can do if you get really ambitious is you can actually build topic modeling in. I have it built into this middleware code, so not only do you know who to talk to, but you can start to build out models of what to talk about. So this is an example here of sort of the current major topics at the event. If we open this up, do a little find replace here, and go back into Excel, make this a percentage. So each line represents a series of words that are most associated with what's being talked about. Now, obviously, if it crosses lines, it's in the different columns. We obviously know that that's a thing. But here we have, for example, new music, hip hop music from Atlanta. That's a portion of the conversation that's happening, and SoundCloud being a part of that. So if we were trying to reach these people, we would want to know that was a platform that we should focus on. as opposed to, say, Spotify, which I actually don't see in here at all. Oh, there it is. It's at the end of this one. And this is kind of fun. In addition to, so Southwest EDU must be going on, so obviously startups and blockchain are part of that. So when we look at our influence map, we might have to disambiguate, okay, do we need to set up a separate set of monitoring for music versus EDU in order to be to know that there's some conversations here that probably don't make a whole lot of sense. So the topic model helps us to refine the influence model to be focused on one specific domain, if you will. One of the things about influence models that is very difficult for software and even for junior level people at brands and agencies is that you need domain expertise to be able to understand influence maps and influence models. And that comes from understanding the topic models, understanding what's happening, what's the context, and the cross-cultural stuff that machines can't really do right now. This is a combination of machine learning and human insight, human judgment. So those two things together are what make topic modeling and influence mapping useful. But Madeline, I hope this gives you some insight as to how to interpret the topic model. If you were going to be using this for your own marketing, you would want to identify everybody in your group and then make sure you go follow them, engage with them, put them on a special Twitter list and stuff, and turn that cluster of fans, if they're not already folks you know, or at least if there's new folks you didn't know about, you'd want to go and make sure you recruited them and brought them into the Madeline Sklar fan base. Hope this was helpful and useful. As always, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and my newsletter, and happy to answer questions about it as you have them. Thanks for watching.